Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about a couple of big time matchups, Texas Tech, Iowa State, as well as Louisville, Clemson. I do think both 11 seeds, actually, both 11 ranked teams, are going to get the wins in those games. Iowa State and Clemson continue on their way to a possible conference title, and that brings me to the question that Anthony has here. We are going to get into all the scenarios. I believe tomorrow I'll jump into all of the conference championship scenarios and then try to break down the playoffs hypotheticals because there are a lot of them. Maybe I'll wait a little bit longer to get to the playoff hypotheticals and just get into the conference championship hypotheticals this upcoming or tomorrow really because the ACC is confusing. The SEC has a wild thing that could happen, but a lot of those things we will break down tomorrow. I can promise you that, Anthony, because I'm about as confused as you are. I can promise you that. But let's jump into the top 10 this upcoming weekend, and we just got to see a lot of different things from these teams. We got to see a lot of different people step up and maybe a couple of units play a little bit better football than they have thus far. But let's start with that game that we picked a little bit earlier. Oregon at Michigan, definitely going to be a huge game for Oregon. And I think they go on the road for the second time in Big Ten play. First time was to Purdue. And no disrespect to West Lafayette, not necessarily the same place as the Big House. It's going to be a big-time battle. Can they handle this momentum? Can they handle a team that is plenty physical on the other side, wanting to get after this team? You know, this is not a game necessarily that I think Oregon was betting on Michigan to be the team that they should just go in and handle by 2 touchdowns and move on with their day. I think they were expecting a fight, and they still very well might get it. But at the end of the day, the biggest thing for me is Dylan Gabriel. He has been able to show up essentially every single game this year for Oregon. He has been a little bit shaky to start, but has really come on throughout the Big Ten schedule. Can he look the way that Quinn Ewers looked against this Michigan back end? Because the reality is he's going to have to look that way. If they're going to want to win a national title at some point, they're going to go up against defenses that are going to be absolute problems to deal with. It's going to be absolutely incredible to watch this one unfold, and if they can't push the ball downfield, if they can't get those explosive plays, this becomes a game that Michigan really likes to play. And then that kind of brings me to the other part. This is a game where Michigan's going to play physically. That's what they do. That's the only real way they're going to be able to win this game. Meet them there. Meet them at the level that they were, because you did it against Ohio State. It was remarkably impressive that they walked out on that field and Oregon looked like the aggressor in that situation. Be that same person. Be that team that walks out on that field and says, we know you're physical. We know you're a team that can push others around. You're not pushing us around. Do the same thing that Texas did. Really, if Oregon can follow the Texas script in this game, they have to feel really good about what they're doing going forward. And Anthony, I think it is one of those games where you can have a pretty crazy outcome here, and it could totally shake up the college football world. I mean, I talked about it yesterday. Feels like this weekend's just a little bit too quiet. This one would make it quite loud in a hurry, that is for sure. And then we got that Georgia-Florida game. We picked this one yesterday, picked Georgia to win this one pretty comfortably, but definitely going to be an interesting thing for Georgia. They're coming off, a bye after a game in Texas where they just dominated. They looked like the Georgia team that we have kind of been waiting for all year. Thing is, we got to see it one more time. We got to see that consistency continue throughout the season. But the biggest thing that I want to see is just a balanced offense. I want to see an offense that runs the ball, that is able to get a little bit of a run game going. Doesn't have to be spectacular, but say 3.5 yards per carry. They're able to find a couple of plays downfield. They're able to not have a couple of drops. They're able to, not see turnovers from Carson Beck. Just play a clean game offensively. You're going to win this game by about 2 scores. There's almost no doubt in my mind. The thing is, Carson Beck and this offense have not necessarily played clean football. They've not necessarily played together football, even in that Texas game. So you're going to have to find a way to get that going, and if you can, it's going to be an absolute nightmare. And then with that, you got to find the run game. You got to be able to find the run game in this game. And frankly, if they can't the rest of the season, this is going to be a team that goes right back to being disappointing. It's going to be really, really interesting in this game. But I do think Tate Ratledge coming back to this offensive line, that's like jump starting a Lamborghini, like putting a rocket launcher on a Lamborghini, because you have these incredible running backs. Now you got one of the best interior offensive linemen in the country. So I would love to see 150 on the ground in this game from Georgia if they're going to be able to get it done. But as Anthony said here, it could get ugly in a hurry. This Georgia team could just absolutely dominate the day. And very much apologize, having tons of trouble with my voice today. But this Georgia team could just totally dominate the day. Trevor Etienne could get a little bit of that revenge that he's out for, but maybe those Florida players are a little bit motivated for this rematch. But it's going to be fascinating to watch this one unfold. I think for Georgia, it's just about playing a clean game offensively. I think your defense is going to do its thing. You're going to have to be able to take care of the ball and just run the ball more than anything else. And then we'll go to the big game. Ohio State, Penn State, we picked it earlier. I am going to go with Ohio State. So what do I need to see from Ohio State this upcoming weekend? I think the biggest thing here is just the thing here is the thing that's all over every single college football show you've seen as they've broken down this game. This offensive line needs to play great football. There's no two ways about that. There's no way that they can play even okay football and be able to win this game because your running backs need room. They're going to have to be able to make plays downfield. They're going to have to be able to get this run game going because Will Howard, without a run game, is not a great quarterback. He's a solid quarterback and was able to step up to the plate in that Nebraska game, so not taking anything away from him. But against this Penn State defense, if you cannot get that run game going, if this offensive line is getting eaten up all day, it's going to be a nightmare for Ohio State. So they don't have to be necessarily perfect. They're going to have to play really good football and a whole lot better than they did last week. And then on the other side, just avoid explosive. I don't necessarily think this Penn State team offense is going to necessarily be able to just grind out drives against you. I think they have the ability to. I think Penn State is one of those teams that is very versatile. They can make a number of plays on the ground and through the air. It's not necessarily saying that if they're not making explosive plays, they're not winning this game. It is to say that this Ohio State team, if you're able to make those explosive plays, is going to be able to kind of unravel just a little bit. I think you could get them kind of on their back heel. So if you're Ohio State, you got to make sure that doesn't happen. You got to make sure you keep everything in front of you, avoid those explosives, and then just make them earn everything. And then finally, I want to see Will Howard be the guy. I want to see Will Howard step up to the plate, totally take over this game and take what the comments that he had earlier in the week, use those. Use everything that you have. It's a little bit crazy. It's one of those things that you never fully understand, but whatever motivation that you need to go into this game and win, take it. And I definitely think it's something that could help Will Howard in this game. It's going to be fascinating to watch this one unfold. And then on the other side, I think that you have a huge thing for Penn State this upcoming weekend because you have not beaten this team in a very, very long time. So the first thing is strictly just the mentality as you head into this game because the reality is it is very easy for this Penn State team to just lose when Ohio State walks off the bus because the reality is it's happened quite a few times in the past. It's happened where it just feels like from the second that game starts, no matter what the score is, no matter the circumstances of that game, Ohio State's going to find a way to win. Penn State's got to walk into here just unafraid. Walk into here like you are a team that absolutely can win this game because you are a team that can absolutely win this game. It's going to be really, really interesting to watch this one unfold, and I think the play calling is another fascinating thing here because you're going to have to deal with a ton of different things with Andy Kotelnick. You're going to have to deal with a ton of different things with that quarterback situation. How do they go about this? How do they find the openings in this Ohio State defense? And if they can't find the openings in this Ohio State defense, how does the defense on the other side respond? It's going to be really interesting to watch that, but how Andy Kotelnick handles the play calling and the quarterback situation, depending on the play calling one way or the other, is going to be really interesting to watch and definitely could just outright decide this game. And then finally, the last thing I'm looking for, I think, goes back to the first thing. This D-line needs to spell blood in the water. They need to understand that they are probably the biggest mismatch on that field when it comes to the Penn State D-line against the Ohio State O-line. That's probably the one that they can really exploit, that can outright take over this game, quote unquote. And I definitely think they just need to walk out there and dominate. They need to walk out there and just really just go to work on this Ohio State offensive line, kind of take over the way that JTT was able to a couple of years ago and say, this is our game. We are going to take over from the D-line and say, you're not going to be able to run the ball. And if that happens, then Penn State's going to win this game. As Anthony said, probably going to be a pretty low-scoring, pretty one-possession type game. Whoever makes those couple of defensive plays could be the team that gets it, and that D-line for Penn State is raring to make those plays. Moving on to that Miami game against Duke. We talked about it in the upset alert segment. Not super worried about this one, but definitely one to watch with a couple of the worries that Duke has, or a couple of the worry that Miami has, and a couple of the great things that Duke does. But the big thing that I want to see here is I want this back end to be a little bit locked down on Saturday. It doesn't have to be perfect. You can allow a couple of big time plays, but the reality is the only way that Duke is going to be able to win this game is if Malik Murphy is able to unleash the ball downfield, make a couple of those 60, 70-yard passes, and totally change this game in a hurry. That is really the only way that Duke is going to be able to go about this. So stay back, be able to play a little bit off coverage, not necessarily do anything incredible, but also make sure that your back end is playing really good football, because you're going to go up against Clemson probably in a couple of weeks. Obviously getting a little bit ahead of myself, but definitely something to watch there. If that does happen, you're going to go up against a back end, or you're going to go up against wide receivers, that are going to cause problems for your back end. You have to be able to step up to this challenge if you're going to be able to step up to that one. And then on the other side, it's Heisman winning time. I understand, you don't want to stat pad, you don't want to push too much energy towards Cam Ward, but you're a 20-point favorite. You should have the ability to put a little bit more on Cam Ward in this game, give him a little bit more to, I don't want to say stat pad, but I do want to say have a big-time game. I think it could be one of those moments where you look back and you just see one of those, if you remember, Jaden Daniels against Florida last year. It was a ridiculous game that kind of put his stamp on the Heisman. Could be this kind of moment for Cam Ward. Probably won't put his stamp on it and totally lock it up, but absolutely could put a really, really good place for him at the very top of that race. And then, as Anthony says here, the run game is going to be huge. Play action is going to be huge down the stretch of the season. So I understand you want to get Cam Ward the Heisman, and frankly, I'd love to see him go crazy in this game, but wouldn't be crazy to me at all if they just followed the same thing that they did in the Florida State game, where he doesn't have to be a superhero. He runs the ball, handles business, and then just keeps that Duke defense on the field like Anthony is saying. So definitely will be interesting to see their approach, but I'll be honest, I would love to see Cam Ward go for about 400 yards in this game, but we'll see what happens on that game. I think Tennessee-Kentucky is a really interesting one. We'll break it down in a little bit more detail on the Kentucky side here in a second, but I do think the obvious thing for Tennessee, connect on deep balls. You have Nico Iamaleava. You have a guy that can unleash the ball downfield, is one of the better, at least mechanically, is one of the better throwers in college football. He hit a deep ball to Dante Thornton. Is that the moment in that Bama game that totally flips the season for this offense? Or is it just kind of a one-off? Is it something that we saw one time and it's going to go back to being very frustrating when they throw the ball downfield? You have to find openings against a back end that is very, very real. It's going to be really, really interesting to watch that one unfold. And then I think the other thing is probably the obvious thing. Don't let them do what Arkansas did to you, because the reality was Arkansas just outmuscled Tennessee in that game. Their defense played incredibly well against that offensive line, and they totally shut down a lot of what Tennessee wanted to do. If Kentucky has the capability to do that physically, if they can, then it's going to be an absolute problem for just about anyone in this game. And then we got Texas A&M, South Carolina, a huge one. I am picking South Carolina to win this game. I am falling into the trap that a lot of people are falling into. But at the end of the day, I want to see what quarterback takes it. I need a quarterback to take it in this game, because I understand A&M fans saying play the quarterback that gives you a better chance to win week over week. I totally get that. I totally understand you have two very good quarterbacks here. The thing is, Texas is coming to town in a couple of weeks, and I can almost promise you, you're not winning that game if you're walking in not knowing who your starting quarterback is. You have to know who that guy is. Would love to see Marcel Reed or Connor Wegman just take this job, and maybe they're not fully able to on Saturday, but at least be able to do it over the next couple of weeks, because at some point, you're going to need a quarterback. You're going to need a guy that goes out there and leads your offense. So definitely something to watch there. And then the other thing, don't take your foot off the gas. If you have a lead in this game, go after them. Really, really tear them to pieces, and don't be the team that lets a lead go away against a South Carolina team where you should be able to win. If you walk in, score 14 quick points, maybe some of that complacency starts to kind of really get in and starts to kind of cause problems for this A&M team. If you can avoid that, then you're probably in pretty good shape. And then Anthony had a question here. He absolutely is. And I think it's one of those interesting questions about Cam Ward, because you watch him play football, and it's all really incredible. He makes all the plays you need him to make. Everything looks really, really great. There's also some things where you're sitting there thinking, how is he doing this? How is he making these plays? Because sometimes the footwork's a little bit off. Sometimes the mechanics are just a little bit inconsistent, or a little bit just not as crisp as you want him to be. The thing is, he continues making the plays. So there's a million different things to worry about with that A&M team, or with that Miami team, There's a million different things to worry about down the road when they play those big-time opponents. But the reality is there's no real time to I don't want to say to think about it, but when they play those big time teams, that's really the only time you're going to be able to see that. So I understand worrying about that, and it's definitely something that hypothetically could cause you problems against a Clemson, against a Texas, against a Alabama. But I also think when you have a guy like Cam Ward, it's kind of just about trusting him, putting him out there and just saying, hey, we trust you to go make the plays. We know you're going to do some pretty crazy things. We know you're going to play this game a little bit unconventionally, but go make the plays that we need you to make. And I think that's probably just the best way that Miami has to go about business. You know, we can worry about his mechanics, and I definitely am, but I think that's probably something you'll have to worry a little bit more about in the NFL, and probably not quite as much in college football, but definitely will be something to watch. Maybe they get into that Clemson game and it all kind of falls off the rails. And then you talked about Mike Elko, relatively conservative, is a guy that just kind of wants to handle their business, move on with the day. Could that cause them problems in South Carolina where they're running the ball, they're just running the ball in the second half, and then South Carolina starts to claw their way back in? That's what I'm worried about with this A&M team, because I understand wanting to just kind of gut out a win, and they have the run game to do that. Against a South Carolina front end that can cause a lot of problems, you might just want to keep your foot on their throat. So definitely something to watch. Maybe he's not the coach to do that, and maybe that's a problem for them, or maybe they're more than fine doing that, and they can take their foot off the throat and be totally fine the rest of the way. Definitely will be something to watch, and I think regardless, Mike Elko is going to have to find a way to handle the craziness that is South Carolina right about now. But let's take our last break here, and when we come back, we got to get into a couple other games. We just got to get into all the games we hadn't had a chance to get to throughout the week. We'll do a little bit of a whip around right after this, so stick with us.